lack of work or lack of decision or lack of need does not mean lack of worth, but that's how it feels, right? You're no longer in the meetings making the decisions. You're no longer the guy that people look to. That is actually where you start becoming susceptible to founder syndrome. You would never do that if you didn't build something, right? And building brings passion brings purpose. All of that brings success, right? So you want that. So it's good to understand, am I in the builder phase still? The next phase is the identity fusion, right? When you start, especially when your organization grows. Sleeping on the Pieces is a perfect example of how an organization grew so fast that me, the founder, I didn't have a chance to understand even my evolution process because it happened so fast. You go from a farm kid from Idaho to literally the next day, a CNN hero. You're on a Lay's potato chip bag. You're on Good Morning America. I mean, what do you do? How do you train for that? So you're evolving as well, super fast. And this identity fusion happens so fast. So when you get to the third phase and the third stage of founder syndrome, which is the most detrimental phase when it comes to the individual. As this diffusion, this decentralization starts to happen, your organization grows, and you're evolving differently, right? You start feeling irrelevant. When you built something, you put your blood, sweat, and tears and answered all the questions and stuff like that, and all of a sudden, there's meetings that are going on that you're not involved with. There's decisions that are happening that you weren't consulted on, right? And even worse, there's people that might come down and actually give you an assignment that's best for the organization. As a founder, it's why it's so hard is because it's a sign of success. That's why relevance wound, identity fusion is not a weakness. It's actually a sign of success for your organization. But what it feels like is being kicked out, is being unessential. And this is part of what I call disciplines of working through founder syndrome. The funny thing is, Bhavesh, I didn't set into my garage thinking I was going to build something that would turn into like a unicorn, like you mentioned, right? And it just grew and grew and grew. And now from that, we've trained over 440 chapters. We've, like you said, we're in 48 states and 4 countries. And we're coming up this summer, we will have built our 400,000th bed. The next thing I knew, I stood up, I started walking to the garage, and my kids were like, "Dad, where are you going?" And I said, "You know what? I've got some leftover wood. I'm going to build another bunk bed, and you're going to help me." And I think why that's significant, is because, Sleep in Heavenly Peace is the charity that came from that started from that. And we build beds for kids ages 3 to 17 who don't have any beds. Well, the funny thing is that's not how it started. This started because I wanted my kids to feel the joy of service, the joys of fulfillment, as well as to appreciate the things they had, like a bed, for crying out loud.
This is the Business Philosopher Within You podcast. I'm your host, Bhavesh Naik. What happens when the passion that builds a movement becomes the thing that limits it? Many founders eventually face something called founder syndrome. The organization grows, the mission expands, and the founder must evolve from the driving force of the enterprise to the architect of a system that can thrive without them. Today's guest has lived that journey while building one of the fastest growing volunteer movements in the world. Luke Mickelson is the founder of Sleep in Heavenly Peace. In 2012, Luke built a bunk bed for a child in need in his garage in Twin Falls, Idaho. That single act of service grew into something much, much bigger. Today, SHP has more than 400 volunteer-led chapters across 47 states and several countries. The organization has mobilized tens of thousands of volunteers and delivered more than 370,000 beds to children who would otherwise be sleeping on the floor. But Luke's journey isn't only about scale. It's about what every founder eventually faces, learning how to move from being a builder of an organization to being the steward of something designed to outlast its creator. I am pleased to have you on this podcast, Luke.
Oh, thanks for having me. Great intro. That's perfect.
Oh, perfect. Great. Yeah. And special shout out to you, our listener. Hey, listen, we're not just a podcast. We are a movement, and you are the business philosopher. We learn from each other and grow with each other. Please remember to like, subscribe, follow, share, and comment. But most important, ask and answer questions. Thank you for tuning in. And Luke, so what an awesome story.
Oh,
So, there are people who build things in the garage that they hope will become a unicorn one day, right? And
sure.
here you are, Twin Falls, Idaho, you're building a bunk bed. So if you would take us back to that moment when you were building that bunk bed in your garage, and what was the inspiration behind that first bunk bed?
The funny thing is, Bhavesh, I didn't set into my garage thinking I was going to build something that would turn into like a unicorn, like you mentioned, right? This
Yeah,
was simply living in a small town. That's where
right.
I grew up, and
Yeah,
small
yeah,
town living for all you out there that know what I'm talking about. The beauties of living in a small town is the same curse that it brings is everybody and they know you, right?
oh yes,
And
yes,
which is a blessing and a curse, but the
yeah,
best part about that is you learn how to support one another, and you have this
right,
almost obligation that you feel because you know everybody, and you know their sisters and their brothers and their parents and their dogs and
yeah,
all sorts of stuff, right? So,
right,
in 2012 is where I was at, living in my small town, and I had a great job, in water
great,
treatment, outside sales. Then I moved into the office and became the vice president of sales and marketing. And then I was going to buy the business, and on paper everything was great.
right,
But I think we go through these periods of time in our life, especially when it seems like midlife crisis type things,
sure,
hit. And for me, I didn't chalk it up as a midlife crisis. I kind of chalked it up as you get later on in life, you start analyzing what really is important to you,
right,
and that's where I was at, right? I was in the middle of, what's most valuable to me, right? Is really
right,
making money and the cars I drive and the toys I have, all those were signs of success, right? But for me,
right,
it almost felt a little hollow, because it wasn't that important to me anymore, right? I think I felt like I achieved that, and now I was looking for something that was a little more meaningful and passionate for me, anyways,
sure,
and purposeful. Well, in my church service, I was what was called a young men's president.
uh-huh,
So I was over the young men's program, and we did all sorts of activities. Basically, Boy Scouts was the, activity arm that we did. So each week we had activities we had to present for these boys, and, doing finding an activity that didn't involve a screen or a computer or a phone is a little hard nowadays,
yeah,
and even back then. Well, sitting in one of my auxiliary meetings, the other leaders of the organization and the chair or the church rather, were talking about things that we were doing in the community and people that we were helping. And they talked about one family that was a little interesting to me because they lived in a part of my small, small town I didn't even know existed, right? Which was kind of, caught my ear. And then the lady started talking about how this family needed a bunch of stuff, right? The mom was a local school bus driver. The dad suffered from some mental health. And so, he couldn't hold a job and they were just struggling. They needed rides to school. The kids didn't have any beds. They needed some help with food. And I just said, whoa, 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 wait a minute. Did you just say the kids didn't have any beds? And I'm like, and she says,
yeah,
yeah. And I said, well, certainly they've got a mattress, right? She said, no, they're just blankets on the hardwood floor. And, that just hit me. It just, for whatever reason, it hit me really strongly. And I thought of 2 things. I thought of my own kids, right? What would that be like for the kids as
right,
well as being a dad, having kids sleeping on the floor? I mean, that'd be hard, you know? And then I thought about, oh, my Boy Scouts. Here's a great opportunity. I can get an Xbox controller out of their hands, put a drill in it, and we'll teach them something, right?
uh-huh,
And so that's what we did. They came over that week, and I kinda had measured my daughter's bunk bed, figured out how to do it, and, of course, I'd never built furniture before in my life, but I wasn't a stranger to tools. Although I had to use some of my wife's tools. But, hey, they work just
yeah,
the same, man.
all right,
So we
yeah,
built this bed and I had to stay back in my garage, because there's a lot of people when they found out what we're doing wanted to be a part of it. And so I let the Boy Scouts and their parents and leaders go. And the next day at church, they just told me how amazing the delivery was, right? The kids so
Yeah.
appreciative, and I was really excited because this kind of lost feeling I had, this unfulfillment, faith crisis, identity crisis that I was going through, kind of went away, right? It filled my heart, and I didn't worry about it. Well, it's
Yeah.
funny how life just creeps itself back in, right? And the next week, you're right back in the same rut, and I didn't want that. And no
Yeah.
matter how many pep talks I gave myself, I was still struggling with it, and I think we all do that to some degree. And well, then the story goes, I was sitting on the couch with my kids watching our program, and it was around Christmas time, right after Thanksgiving, and kids had, presents on their mind. And of course, a commercial came on about some Xbox or whatnot. And I'm sitting there like every parent does, don't you dare ask for that.
Sure.
You're just
Yeah.
thinking about it. And of course, they're
Right.
kids, they're gonna ask for it. And it's just
Yeah.
one of those things that really hit me, right? Going through this internal struggle no one knew about, right? I'm just trying to keep it to myself and trying to work
Right.
through it and trying to figure things out. I just did this great project that made me feel really good and filled my bucket. And now that's gone. And I solved that problem. And now my kids want this and they have beds and these people that, it was just all this big turmoil going to my head. And, Bhavesh, the next thing I knew, I stood up, I started walking to the garage and my kids were like, "Dad, where are you going?" And I said, "You know what? I've got some leftover wood. I'm going to build another bunk bed and you're going to help me."
Yeah.
And I think why that's
Right.
significant, is
Yeah.
because, Sleep in Heavenly Peace is the charity that came from that started from that.
Right.
And we build beds for kids ages 3 to 17 who don't have any beds. Well, the funny thing is that's not how it started. This started because I wanted my kids to feel the joy of service,
Right.
the joys of fulfillment, as well as to appreciate the things they had, like a bed for crying out loud. So
Sure.
that's how this all started. But when we finished the bed with my kids, I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know child bedlessness was even a thing, right?
Yeah.
We had solved the one problem, the only child I knew that didn't have one in my community, and we were done. So it was recommended to me to put this on, Facebook buy sell trade, right? And this is
Right.
14 years ago. I didn't even know this really existed back then. So when I did
Sure.
that, that's when I uncovered the real truth, and that is child bedlessness. It's not even a real word, but it's a real problem. It
Yeah.
represents greater than 3% of the total population of any given town.
Wow.
So if there's, you got 100,000 people in your town, there's 3,000 kids sleeping on the floor, and no
Yeah.
one knows about it, right? And
Yeah.
back then, certainly no one knew about it.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
decided then and there, okay, this family Christmas project's gonna happen every year, and then a couple years later, it turned into a charity. I didn't know what to do or how to run a charity. I'm an entrepreneur, so I've started a lot of
Yeah.
businesses. That's just how I ran it, right?
Right.
And, and it just grew and grew and grew, and now from that, we've trained over 440 chapters. Like you said, we're in 47, 48 states and 4 countries, and we're coming up this summer, we will have built our 400,000th bed.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and so, it really blew up from a simple concept that started out as a small, tiny moment of, "Hey, I wanna teach my kids something," right? And
Yeah.
now
Yes.
now it's turned into the largest bed building charity in the world.
That is an amazing, amazing story. And you said something that struck me 3%. So if I go down to the mall and if I see 100 people, 100 households, there are 100 kids, I suppose, 3 of them are sleeping on the floor.
It's actually even worse than that,
Yeah.
so it's by population. So if there's 100
Yeah.
people, there's 3, they
And in
represent, if you will, right?
right. And
3%.
there's kids in there. Right.
Correct. Yeah,
3% of those kids
yeah.
are sleeping on the floor. That is astounding.
The
That is
sad truth
sad.
and the sad
Yeah.
truth about that, honestly, Bhavesh, is there's no national statistics. The reason why we
Right.
even know that number is because
Yeah.
Sleep in Heavenly Peace has, kind of watched this
Right.
and did statistics on this, and we're not statisticians. I mean, I
Right.
didn't go to college
Yes.
for that, right? We just
Yeah.
know that,
Yeah.
hey, this is the applications, this is the population,
Yeah.
and it's on average. But here's the
Yes.
reality. Here's the reality. So we cover, or I should let me put it this way. As you and I talk right now,
Right.
over the entire country, we have 160,000 kids on our waiting list, right?
Wow.
And the sad reality of that is we only cover 28% of the United States. So we don't even cover 7 or 30%. So
Yes.
only 30%, and they still have 160,000 kids. So we know it's greater than 3%. We
Yes.
just know that it's greater than that, you know,
Yeah.
which is a
Yes.
sad deal.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
anything
Yeah.
greater than 0%, right, is bad.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's a huge need. Yeah.
Absolutely. And when did you realize that you built that first bed and you built that second bed?
Mhm.
When did it hit you that this was an organization? When did you start thinking that, hey, I actually need to build this out into
Right.
like a movement or an
Yeah.
organization?
Great question. It really happened, I wanna say, a little gradually,
Right.
as we started building more beds. That first year after I delivered my first bed, we built 20 beds and delivered them all before Santa showed up. And it
Uh-huh.
was it was fun, it was cool, it was a family Christmas project. "Hey, let's do it next year." So we did it next year,
Yeah.
and a buddy of mine did it in Boise, so we built 51 beds. But the funny thing was, the more we shared what we were doing with the public on our social medias and stuff, the more we heard about more kids and
Right.
more people want to be involved. And so naturally
Yes.
we're like, yeah, let's do more. And I think when I realized that we were onto something, or rather we'd uncovered a pretty unknown problem, I started getting calls from my local child protective services, CASA, foster care, all these agencies that work with transitioning homelessness and these families. I was like their favorite guy. Like they'd call
Uh-huh.
me up and I'd be like, and I found out why. And the reason why is because they told me, they said, "Luke, you might not know this, but finding a bed for a child is oftentimes the single hardest thing to do for them," which blew me
Wow.
away. I'm like, even more
Yeah.
than like getting a couch or a
Yeah.
TV or a
Yeah.
microwave or whatever, some standard appliances or standard things for a household. They said, yeah. And I found out later the other reason why that is not a shocker to me is because when I decided to be a charity in 2014, I said, like any businessman starting a business, let me go see who's doing this and what are they doing and how they're doing it and all this stuff. So I set to the internet to try to find another charity that was building and providing beds for kids. In
Right.
the entire country, Bhavesh, I found one. That was it. And they were in
Wow.
North Carolina. And
Hmm.
they were called Beds for Kids, which I thought was a cool name.
Yeah.
That was it. And so
Yes.
the reason why I was their guy, these agencies is because there was no other agency around that were providing this need. So when you realize that there's a big need and no one's providing it and you
Right.
know how to do it, of course you're going to jump in, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And there was a time. So, when did you run into this idea of what the fund revolution? And it seems like you are a very pretty introvert, introspective person,
Hmm.
and you have a pretty strong sense of self awareness, right?
Sure.
So was it always a part of your internal reflection process where you think, "Hey, I'm going to have to grow this organization and make it independent of me," or was it more like a gradual process where you started to think, "Hey, you started running into some issues
Yeah.
where you know I have to jump in. I have to do this. I have to run it. I'm the charismatic guy. I'm the passionate person who's driving this, right?" But then that problem for some people it becomes like an organization. It becomes a bottleneck, right?
Oh
That
yeah.
there's only so much that Luke can do,
Yeah.
right? And there is only so many decisions that Luke can make, right? But
Correct.
there has to be some kind of a distribution of the responsibilities,
Yeah.
maybe decision making, maybe some kind of like a structure, like organizational structure. So when did that happen? The first
You know,
time that you run into that issue?
it's a great question. It happens so gradually. And here's the stark reality.
Right.
Anybody that starts something, right? The first phase of what you're talking about is
Right.
called the build phase or the builder phase, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
every for-profit, nonprofit, CEO, even leadership positions, you start out at a new
100%.
startup
Yeah.
and someone says,
Yeah.
"Hey, no one's ever," like in SHP, we
Right.
have what we call a chapter support lead. It's kind of like a regional director, right? And
Sure.
when I hired
Yeah.
him, they're like, "What do I do?" And I said, "Listen, there's never been a Sleeping Heavenly Peace chapter support leader position ever, so you're gonna have to
Right.
figure it out, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah. Right.
but
Yeah.
that's just an example of a
Yeah.
builder. And so
Sure.
when
Sure.
you I didn't know it at the time. I mean, I knew I was building something. I'd started
Right.
organizations and companies before, so I knew the build phase, right? I knew
Right.
the startup phase, and I had to put structure into place,
Sure. Yeah.
especially expecting expansion and growth and things that's scalable and stuff like that. I knew all that
Sure.
was happening. What I didn't know, and what a lot of sad to say, a lot of business leaders, founders especially,
Yeah.
don't realize is you are now embarking and put yourself in the very vulnerable position of being susceptible to founder syndrome.
Yes.
Now, I had never heard of that term until just
Uh-huh.
a year ago, and I'm
Right.
telling you right now, it saved me. And
Mm.
what happens in the moment you realize, "Wait a minute,
Yeah.
what's going on here?" Right?
Right.
I do feel like I'm a pretty stable, emotionally mature guy,
Yes. Yeah.
I'm passionate, I get excited, don't get me wrong, but I know where those things come from, I know how to
Right.
control those pretty good.
Yeah.
But when you start an organization and you let it grow, right? You're in
Right.
the build phase, you're building it. Everything revolves around you. You make all
Right.
the decisions, good and
Right.
bad. Something
Right.
happens bad, you absorb it. Something
Exactly.
good, you exploit it and you share it. Media jumps in and you start advertising. Everything is responsible. You're responsible for everything, right?
Sure. Yes.
And there's beauty in that. That's how organizations grow.
Right.
But one thing happens that you have no control over, and it's not a bad thing, but it
Yeah.
just happens, and that's called identity fusion. This is the
Right.
second phase or the second stage of founder syndrome. And
Yes.
and so you're sitting here,
And you said identity fusion, right?
fusion, correct.
Right.
So what
Right.
happens is you have your own identity, right? And the
Right.
sad thing is
Right.
you grew up. I mean, I'm a small farm kid from Idaho, right? That's been my
Yes.
identity forever, right?
Right.
And then
Right.
you start something. Now,
Right.
this corporation or organization or nonprofit, whatever, or even this
Right.
leadership position, right?
Exactly. Right.
It gets created. Now you
Yeah.
have Luke Mickelson, right? Or
Yeah.
whomever, and
Right.
this organization you started. Well, all of a sudden, they slowly, well, sometimes rapidly, they
Yeah.
start to fuse together, right?
They become one, basically.
They become one. A great
Yeah.
example, I'm a great example of this.
Uh-huh.
99.9% of anybody on the planet that has ever heard of Luke Mickelson only knows him through Sleep in Heavenly Peace,
Right.
right? And
Right.
there's a few
Yes.
people that only know Sleep in Heavenly Peace because of
Yeah.
Luke Mickelson,
Sure.
right? So
Yes. Yeah.
your identity, whether you like it or not, you
Mhm.
know, your identity becomes fused together, right? And
Right.
and it
Yes.
actually is needed to happen, right? Because
Yeah.
that passion, you're not gonna slow your passion down or else your company's probably gonna die.
Sure.
Your
Right.
passion builds, pretty soon people and everybody's heard this before, "Oh, this is your baby," right? This
Yeah.
is what you
Right.
created. It's
Ac
you and it and blah, blah. So
Yeah.
naturally, whether you like it or not, people are
Right.
already forcing this fusion between you and your organization.
Right.
And so now the challenge is and identifying that this is gonna happen, I think is very important. That's why I do some coaching on this because,
Yes.
it's nothing that you wanna avoid because you can't. You can't
Yes.
avoid this, right? And
Yeah.
that's why
Yeah.
I say every founder goes through and is susceptible to the effects or I should say the symptoms, if you will, of
Right.
founder syndrome. And it
Right.
starts with identity fusion because
Right.
then now, as your company evolves, and of course, you want it to evolve, right? You want it to
Right.
get ultimately, you have it in your back of your mind that, "Hey, I want this to be bigger than me," obviously,
Sure.
that means
Sure.
success, that means I make more money, that means whatever, right?
Right. Right.
Well, the challenge with that, Bhavesh, is each one of these, your identities, the corporate or the company identity and your own identity, we all evolve. Of course,
Mhm.
we're gonna evolve as we grow and get
Sure.
bigger. The
Yeah.
the problem is they evolve so differently. An
Yes.
organization evolves. Number 1, it doesn't have any emotion. That's
That is
one
a
of the
great
biggest
point.
challenges.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
it requires and evolves in a much different way than
Yes.
the founder will, right?
Yes.
We
Yes.
don't need we don't need assistant managers to help manage our life, right? We don't
That's true.
evolve past that. The company
Yeah.
does.
Right.
right?
Right.
And that evolution process inherently and ultimately will require diffusion and
Yes.
disconnect and
Yes.
decentralization, right? So
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
what you've grown, and especially over a few years, what you fuse together, what people know you as, what
Yeah.
people know the company as, all of these things, they all of a sudden start to separate,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And this
Yes. Yes.
diffusion is what leads to the next stage, which is, in my opinion, the hardest stage for founders to deal with, and I call
Yeah.
it the
And
go ahead.
before we go to the next stage, right?
Yep,
So can
yep,
you go back to the first? So build and infuse, right?
yep,
So fusion. So you're a builder first. So in that builder phase, I'm suppose you also laying out your corporate structure. For example, you said there
correct,
is Luke Mickelson here, founder and CEO, the president, right? And then he's gonna have 3 or 4 people, and different organizations have different functions. So, for
right,
example, in your case, everybody has finance and marketing and sales and
right,
outreach and those kinds of things. But then you would have what we call operations, and operations would be building the beds, and then but now in your case it's a little bit different. Could you walk us through that a little bit, because you have chapters, right? And
right.
these chapters are basically so there are volunteers who come, and you have to manage the volunteers, right?
Sure,
And
sure,
later I want to go get into that, because this is another problem, right? Because the for-profit organizations, quote unquote, right, the commercial enterprises, they they don't have volunteers, they have employees who
correct,
get paid. You are
right,
managing, you have some employees, but you also have some who are actually volunteers who are not getting paid, right?
right, correct.
So how did you set that up, like in the real short description of how you set up that organization? And then I'm assuming that happens at the build phase.
It does, yeah, and
Yeah.
that's all part of building the organization, right?
Right. Right.
It's very important that you plan for scale, right? You
Right.
make
Right.
decisions that are based on, is it scalable, right?
Sure.
I knew a long time ago that
Yeah.
if I was gonna solve child bedlessness in our country, it ain't gonna be solved by some farm kid from Idaho,
Yeah.
it's gonna have to be solved locally, right? And
You're
so
right.
when you go into that mindset, right,
Yeah.
then almost quote the franchise or the franchise model makes sense.
Right.
In the
Right.
nonprofit world, it's a little bit different. We operate under one EIN number, almost like a
Yes.
for-profit company.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I knew that we needed to put together a structure that was manageable, um, and had control over on a national level, right?
Right.
We can't let people come in and just ruin our name, and all of a sudden we're
Sure.
not building beds anymore. We're building,
Yeah. Yeah.
all
Yeah.
sorts of stuff, right?
Yeah. You
So
have standards, right? Yeah.
yeah, standards, policies
Right.
that need to come
Right.
into place,
Sure.
when it comes to the nonprofit world, there's a lot of similarities to for-profit
Right.
companies, but there are also some differences,
Sure.
and that
Sure.
was, I'll be honest with you, I'd never ran a nonprofit before, and the
Uh-huh.
ones I consulted weren't the greatest help, but
Yes.
we
Yes.
we
Yes.
kinda built the plane as we flew it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we had a lot of help. My the biggest, I think the biggest, success I have that I like to attribute to is I'm not maybe necessarily the greatest manager,
Right.
um, because I give people an assignment and expect them to do it, right?
Yeah. Sure.
But I think I'm pretty good at finding a round peg in a round hole, right? And
Ah.
I think
Yes.
that's important. And my
Yeah.
management style is, hey, listen, you give a guy or a gal a responsibility, let them do it. Let them
Yeah.
fail at it. Let them figure it out. Because
Right.
what happens to them,
Mm-hmm.
and this is important, what
Yeah.
happens
Yeah.
to them is now they become in the build phase, just like you did, right? They're
Yes.
building their
Yes.
position.
Yeah.
And that there's a lot of buy-in that comes from
Yeah.
that, right? When you're a nonprofit,
100%.
yeah,
Yes.
especially starting out, you can't pay anybody.
Yeah.
No
Right.
one
Right.
makes any
Yeah.
money, right? The
Yeah.
only
Yeah.
currency you offer is
Yeah.
the fulfillment from completing your mission. In this case, building
Exactly.
beds for kids, right?
Exactly. Right.
But there is also another piece of fulfillment, and all you nonprofits out here, here's a little
Yeah.
gold nugget.
Yeah.
When you allow people buy-in and then
Right.
give them a responsibility that they ultimately have to carry out, you don't solve it for them. Let them solve it. Let them fail. Let them succeed, right? They
Yes.
all of a sudden, in some small way, identity fusion happens to them too, right? And
Yeah.
you want that to happen because that's where you get the late night thinking and the after
Yeah,
work hours and the
exactly.
extra time. What every employer
Yeah,
wants from their employees, right?
yeah, yeah.
Is
They're
thought,
engaged.
dedication.
They're emotionally engaged. They're in it,
Correct.
right? Yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah.
that's how you move the needle much quicker is
Sure.
and I do a little coaching on this too about creating passion in your employee about what they're doing, right?
Right,
Now,
right.
some of us are just I shouldn't say some of us, well, maybe I fit in that category, at least used to, where a paycheck was the only passion I got, and
Yeah,
there's some value there. But
yeah.
true
Oh,
passion.
yeah, and on that point, that you bring up something very important point. I wanna kind of. So this is the kind of a parallel between the nonprofit or the volunteer organization and for-profit,
Mhm,
paid
mhm,
organization, where it can become a transaction, or work
mhm.
for pay, right? Uh, I have a job and I have bills to pay, so I show up and do my work, and then at the end of the day, uh, I'll do the stuff that I really want to do, which is go build a bed for a child, right? Or it could be hobby or play games, or have a weekend project or something like that. Spend the time with the family, but they are not bringing that passion to it. And one of the
Right.
things I always advocate to in the commercial world is to run an organization or a volunteer organization, volunteer team, where people don't get paid to do what they are doing, right? So that you have to find out something else, which is you're talking about this right now, and
Yep,
that is so important, that you have to find something in them that grabs them and engages them and fuses them right
yep,
into their role, that it
correct,
becomes one. They become one with their role. So and,
correct.
and what is that
Oh, that's
element,
yeah,
yeah,
that's an easy answer. It's
uh,
passion.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
a a good leader a good
right,
leader is exactly what you just said,
right,
finds passion in someone, right?
yeah,
Because when you have an employee that's just there for a paycheck, right, they're gonna do
right,
their job, they're not gonna go the
yeah,
extra mile per se, they're not
yeah, yeah,
so what is it about let's take Sleep and Emily Peace.
right,
What is it about Sleep and Emily Peace where you got you got guys or gals, people that have full-time jobs already, right? They
yes,
they
yeah,
they get done with their day at work, and
yeah,
they can't wait to jump in and start doing their service work, their charity
yeah,
work. They
right,
love it more than their job, and
exactly,
they not only don't get paid, oftentimes they spend their own money, you know? So
yes,
what is the difference, right? If you
yeah,
look at that,
yeah,
it's very simple. The difference is the passion, right?
yeah, yes,
And a sense of purpose in a way. And
yeah,
so, good leaders they need to find what people, are passionate about, or at least
yeah,
what can they be passionate about in their work. Now,
yeah,
the hardest thing is, I don't know, I'm not an accountant. I can't think of anything
yeah,
worse than being an accountant stuck behind a desk, right? That would be hard to figure out.
yeah,
Some people love it. I get it.
right,
But the best way, and I do some keynote speaking on this, the best way to bring and find passion is get their buy-in. Let
right,
them build something. When you create a builder in your employee, right?
yeah,
Again, what happens? They move to the next phase, which is identity fusion. And when they
right,
feel like their identity and their position or their company or whatever come together, there is an emotional sense of success, determination, drive that gets created that far, far outreaches any sort of paycheck, and
sure,
so
sure,
that I think that, and thank you for bringing that up because that's very important in our
yeah,
world today. We grew up. Well, I'm a little younger for this, but in the old days, right? It's like, hey, you do your job because you're getting a paycheck, right? I think,
yeah,
and that's how my parents were raised, my grandparents were raised. I do see that needle shifted quite a bit now in our day and age. Is
yeah,
these millennials and these
yes.
whatever
They're more
generation we're
socially
in.
conscious. Yeah, yeah,
100%, right? And
yeah,
and
yeah,
and and successful employees recognize that, listen,
right.
working environment does matter.
It
It
does,
does matter
yes.
quite a
Yeah, and they
bit.
recognize that. You're right. Yeah,
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 and I
yeah,
can't help but think when you break it down to the most common denominator, the reason why that is because they're creating passion in
yeah,
these future leaders. They're creating
yeah,
passion in these employees, and then the next step is just giving them that passion to purpose, which is
right.
allowing them to build something,
Yeah, right, right. A couple of things. One is a purpose. You mentioned purpose. I think that there is in here in purpose, there is something about doing something beyond myself. I think that it's not about me, it's about others. I don't know why there is such a relaxing feeling about that.
Yeah.
When you take yourself out of the equation and you're just doing something, what we call service, but
Correct.
sometimes the word gets overused. But that's what it is, right? It's doing something for someone else without me worrying about me, at least for that moment. I know
Correct.
I got bills to pay, but in that moment, I'm doing this for someone else. This is not about me.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that? I think that this is
100%.
you live with this all the time. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I live by the motto and always have that
yeah,
if you want true joy, you
yeah.
gotta stop thinking about yourself and look
Right.
how to serve someone else out. Service, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
your problems
Yeah.
don't go away.
Yes.
When you go
Exactly.
and serve, right?
Yeah.
They don't go away. But
Yeah.
what does
Yeah.
happen is you get fulfillment from service, right?
Right.
And
Right.
you get a better, yeah, I'm gonna use the word better, a better
Yeah.
perspective on life, on who you
Exactly.
are, on your
Yeah.
problems. And when you
Yes.
have a better perspective of this monster that you've been thinking about and dealing with, whatever the problem is, then when you look at it at a different point of view or a different perspective, because of the service that you did and recognizing that, hey, you know what, you're not the only one going through this.
Yeah.
Whatever you come to realization, what I call is you just named your monster. You turned
Yeah.
around, you named
Yeah.
your monster, and now once you're looking at your monster in a different perspective, you're
Yes.
able to shrink it, right?
Yeah.
Now, your
Yeah.
problem
Yeah.
doesn't seem as heavy as it
Yeah.
used to be, and
Right.
probably not as heavy as it was never that heavy, right?
Right.
When
Yeah.
you can't
Yeah.
see your monster, when you don't wanna face it, then your mind is gonna create this horrible, huge, terrible monster, when all actuality, it's probably something very small, and insignificant, and so
Yes.
yeah,
Yes. Yes.
true service, brings a perspective in people's lives that I believe, allow them to work through some of their hardest challenges. That's why when people serve, they're so happy, and they're happy
Yes.
later on. Even if they,
Yeah.
I don't know, missed a meeting or
Hmm.
or lost a client or something like that, and they
Yeah.
served that day, right?
Right.
Why are they much happier, right? Or at least
Yes.
they seem they're
Yeah.
happy. It's because they're now being able to look at that and say, "You know what? Hey, I lost a client, but guess what? I'm a good person. I'm gonna get 2 more." It
Yeah.
brings a different perspective.
Absolutely, it does. Yes, yes. And thank you for talking about this in such clear terms,
Oh,
because you live with it and breathe it all the time. So
right.
you had this perspective, and then that's it's very important. And something else that is sort of like a more logistical thing, which is that so bill phase. Is this
Mhm.
also the time when you say, okay, here's my finance guy, and here's my service gal, and here's my fundraising person, and here's my PR person, yeah,
Mhm.
or do you take, or is it still in flux? So are you starting to sort of lay out your org chart at this point?
Yeah,
And are they all volunteers, or some of them are getting paid now at this point?
well, when it comes to nonprofit world, right,
Yeah.
you're typically building out your structure, your org chart, if you will, far
Right.
before pay comes into play, right?
Yes. Yeah.
They're in a sense, really, qualified for their positions, right? Because
Right.
it's
Yes.
friends and that's how
Whoever
you
is showing
start.
up, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
whoever
Yeah.
shows up,
Whoever
you
walks through the
fog a
door.
mirror, you jump in, right?
Yeah.
But the beauty about that really
Yeah.
is, one of the most valuable things in an employee, and certainly a volunteer, is their
Yeah.
passion, right? Again,
Yes.
it kinda
Yeah.
goes back to passion because,
Yeah.
when I mean, I have no business being a marketer. I didn't go to college to learn how to market, but you know what? Because I have so much passion about what I was doing, I thought of things I'd never thought of before, right? And
Yeah.
strategies became so much clearer to me and how to do this and how to do that. And I saw that in people that had no business being in, I don't know, finance or program managing or anything like that, right? They just wanted to do it. They wanted to help, and so we jumped in. And of course, there's a period of time where that's not appropriate anymore. You
Right.
expand as your business evolves. We talk about
Right.
evolution again. As your
Sure.
business evolves, that's part of the business evolution, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard because guess what? That person in that position that no longer can probably, skillfully handle what needs to be handling, they
Right.
have to evolve too, right? So,
Yes.
even employees suffer from founder syndrome
Yeah.
because they've built something. There's some on some level, some identity fusion that happens with that. It's like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm the HR rep for XYZ company, and
Right.
that's how
Right.
you're known. That's how you're known
Yeah.
at work. Sometimes that's how
Right.
you're known privately.
Right.
So identity fusion happens. And so
Yeah.
when that
Yeah.
separates, you know,
Yes.
that's when things get difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. So, did you have some of those lined up just yet, or did that come later? There's some organization, the org chart.
Oh,
Did you have a
yeah.
position lined up?
So it was gradual, right?
Yes.
You start
Yes.
out with just you, and then you have
Yeah.
another buddy, and then
Yeah.
another gal, and so I would say over several years, we
Okay.
built internally our org chart.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something did happen with us in the nonprofit world. Once you reach $50,000 in monetary donations,
You're
then
right.
you're forced.
Ah.
IRS requires that you have a board of directors,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yeah.
And at first, I didn't understand how critical that is, how needed, number one, it is. To
Right.
me, it was
Right.
just like, well, I'm making all the decisions. I guess if we have to have a
Yeah.
board, we have to have a board.
Right. Yes.
Um, and that was a little bit of my founder syndrome starting
Yeah.
to creep in a little bit too, because,
Yeah.
I held so much value in my organization and I had solved so many problems by myself. It was
Yeah.
hard to look past
Yeah.
any other solutions that some sort of body of people were going to solve for me, right?
Right. Right. Yes.
But I knew as a founder, as an entrepreneur, that if I want my business to grow, I can't be the bottleneck, right? And,
Right.
and that's
Right.
some of the hardest challenges for founders and CEOs and owners of
100%.
companies is
Yeah.
because they know this.
Yes.
Trust me, all of them know,
They know
appreciate,
it.
and
Yeah.
love that. Hey,
Mhm.
my organization is going to grow. Guess what? I actually have to have a sales manager. I actually have to
Yeah.
go hire 2 more salesmen. I mean, this is all great, amazing things, and it's
Yeah.
called the business evolution. Um,
Yes.
but what they're not ready for, not known about, not trained on, and will ultimately affect them, whether they like it or not, is that that diffusion and that
Yeah.
evolution that happens to the leader is much different than the organization.
Absolutely. And this is such an important point, because there is, in the business world, there's lots of what they call operating system, right?
Mhm,
Business operating
mhm.
system.
Yep.
So, you just bring in process, you bring in software, you bring CRM, you bring a bunch of stuff and put it all together. There's a technology base, and
Sure.
there's the software system that's supposed to fix all our problems, and there is processes, right? We've
Right.
put a lot of emphasis on processes. All of these things make us more efficient.
Right.
But I think that the founders get into a position where if they don't evolve,
Right.
the system doesn't help. That they get to a
Correct.
point where the operational things are there, the
Yeah.
processes are there, but if they are still the bottleneck is inside in the head, right?
Yep. Yep.
The organization is still going to kind of stay, stagnant.
Correct.
And they
Correct.
can't grow beyond the founder. So,
Correct.
so first is build, second is the identity fusion, right? And then
Correct.
you
Mhm.
was, my apologies,
No, you're fine. I
the third,
appreciate. It's funny.
phase.
Well,
Yeah,
and I think the build phase, they all have their important
right,
parts, right? The build
right,
phase is important because that is actually where you start becoming susceptible as I guess you want to. I mean, you don't
right.
want to, you don't realize it, but you're coming susceptible to founder syndrome. You would never do that if you didn't build something, right? And
Yeah, that's
building
true.
brings passion, passion brings purpose, all of that brings success, right? So you
Right.
want that. So it's good to understand, am I in the builder phase still, right? And that's
Yes.
usually the longest phase, right? At
Yeah.
least in my
Yeah.
experience, because it does take a while to build to the point where the next phase is the identity fusion, right? When you
Right.
start, especially when your organization grows. Sleeping on the Pieces is a perfect example of
Yeah.
how an organization grew so fast that
Yeah.
not just the founder, but me, the founder, I didn't have a chance to understand even my evolution process because it
Yeah.
happened so fast.
Yeah.
You go from a
Yeah.
farm kid from Idaho to literally the next day a CNN hero. You're on a Lay's potato chip bag. You're on Good
Yeah.
Morning America. I mean, there's
Yeah.
what do you do?
Yes.
How do you train for that? Like,
Right. Right. Yes. Yeah.
so you're evolving as well,
That's
super
true.
fast, and this
That's true.
identity fusion happens so fast. So when you get to the third phase and the
Yeah.
third stage of founder syndrome, which is the most detrimental phase,
Mhm.
when it comes to the individual, and
Yeah.
that's the relevance wound, and I
Ah,
call it that because the biggest challenge that founders and start to feel is as this diffusion, this decentralization starts to happen, your organization grows, and
yeah.
you're evolving differently, right? You start feeling irrelevant,
Ah,
right?
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and if you think about it, when you built something, you put your
yeah,
blood, sweat, and tears and answered all the questions and stuff like that, and all of a sudden
yeah,
there's meetings that are going on that you're not involved with. There's
yeah,
decisions
yeah,
that are happening that you weren't consulted on, right?
yeah.
And even worse, there's people that might come down and actually give you an assignment that's best for the organization, depending on your
Right,
structure, right?
right,
As a
right.
founder, you know, it's why it's so hard is because it's a sign of success. That's why
Yeah,
relevance wound, identity fusion is not a weakness. It's not a
yeah,
weakness. It's
yeah.
actually, and this is what I help founders realize, it's
Right,
actually a sign of success for your organization. But
right.
what it feels like is being kicked out, is
Yes.
being unessential, that
Yeah,
people
yeah.
think that, and this is part of the 5, what I call disciplines of working through founder syndrome, you
Right.
know, you know, lack of work or lack of decision or lack
Right.
of need does not
Yeah.
mean lack of worth, but
Right.
that's how it feels, right?
Yes.
You're no
Yes.
longer in the meetings making the decisions. You're no longer the guy that people look to. I'll give you my personal example. I talk about this in my book
Right.
as the moment that things changed, it
Yeah.
shifted,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, we had our biggest build, we ever did. We built 5,000 beds in 24 hours,
Yeah.
and it was with one of our major national sponsors, Lowe's,
Right.
a partnership I spent 10 years building and growing and
Mm.
happened because of me, and, you have all these it was a builder phase, right?
Right.
Well, it came to the point where or we were doing the event and Good Morning America showed up and they asked the sponsoring agent, "Okay, who should we interview from Sleep and Emily Peace?" And they said, "There's Luke, the founder, or there's, my buddy
Right.
Jordan, who's the, executive director." Well, they picked the executive director, which makes sense
Right.
because it was an operational business. They wanted
Yeah.
to talk to someone that's business.
Sure.
Well, as a founder,
The
ouch,
wound. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
hurt. Not
Yeah.
not because I cared about the publicity, and
Right.
that's where the board or other employees or other
Yeah.
managers will look at the reactions of a founder, and their first reaction is like, "Oh, well, that's just ego, and he just wants it."
Yeah.
You gotta remember, us founders, right, in the beginning stages, if Good Morning America was gonna show up at your doorstep, right, number
Yeah.
1, it's never happened to you before, so
Right.
you
Right.
wanna take advantage of it as
Yes.
much as you can. So
Yeah.
these big media events that happen, for a founder, we look at it as it is an obligation. I mean,
Mhm.
you're gonna win or lose this, right? This
Yeah.
is how you
Yeah. Yeah.
feel. I've gotta
Right.
get this right. I've gotta get this right? And so
Yes.
when someone else steps into that role, you can't help but go, I don't know if they're qualified, right? You just
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that, and you just
Yes.
feel that, and then the worst
Yeah.
of it, there was someone sitting right next to me during this interview, and I was super happy for my buddy, right? He was
Right. Right.
on Good
Yeah.
Morning. I'd already been on it before, it's not a big
Yeah.
deal, and I was happy for him. I
Yeah.
legitimately was, but I
Yeah.
had this pain going into my
Mhm.
head, and then I had one of the board of directors next to me, who happens to be another friend of ours, said, "Hey, look, there's SHP's new spokesperson." And
Ooh,
I
ouch.
I mean, that was a knife in the back.
Right.
I mean,
So
and here's the thing, the answer to that is, of course, he's not a new spokesperson, right?
yeah, right,
And
right.
even if it was, right, as a
Yes.
founder, that's a sign of success. It's no longer
Mhm.
centered around you, but that is the diffusion. That's like the ultimate diffusion that happens
Right.
with your identity.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, what saved you, what built you, what kept you going, it
Yeah.
feels like you're not even a part of that anymore.
Yes.
And it's a
Yes.
scary, hurtful feeling, and
Yeah.
this is just one example of many examples of relevance wounds that
Yeah.
that that us founders experience, during this phase, and
Yeah.
this is the phase where founders, listen up, and I don't wanna get emotional because
Yeah.
this is really critical.
Yes.
I w
Yeah.
I started Sleep and Emily Peace.
Yeah.
right? 14 years ago, I
Right.
put my whole soul into it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I promise you, if I didn't focus in on founder syndrome, if I hadn't found it, if I hadn't worked on it in less than 2 years, I would no longer be a part of this organization.
There you go.
And there
Yeah.
is many examples of,
Yes.
certainly in the nonprofit, but in other organizations as well, that
Yeah.
founder is not
Commercial.
even part of it. And the
Yeah.
reason why is because when they experience relevance wounds, right,
Yes. Yeah.
their reaction, because they don't know how to deal with it. I
Yeah.
didn't. I didn't
Yes.
know, and I was telling myself,
Yeah.
"Stop it.
Yeah.
This is not what it's about. This is all
Yeah.
good. This
Yeah.
is all
Yeah.
great."
Yeah.
But you cannot get past that feeling that
Yes.
happens. And
And
and when you
and
don't, then your
yeah.
responses and your reactions are
Right.
extremely negative.
And I want to pause with that, and I want to work with that a little bit, Luke, because this is so important. What
Mhm.
you are one of the extremely few people that I know who is so in touch with what's going on in here.
Mm,
Few people, especially
mm.
men,
Yeah.
right? And
That's on that, by the way.
and not only that, but you're talking about it very openly. You're very
Mm,
transparent, and we're seeing you as who you are, right?
mm.
And that's a tremendous gift for. So you're lucky to have it.
Oh, thank you.
But people are going through this, and I think that we live in a society where we don't. That is not a part of our repertoire of
Right.
skills. Looking at myself, we've
Yeah.
done, in my work, I've done disc analysis and Myers Briggs and all of these other things, but people don't like it. A lot of people, and some people actually get into it and they totally
Yeah.
love it. Most people don't like it. They don't like to look at themselves. And now, what you describing, and you calling a relevance wound, right?
Correct. The
Relevancy wounds,
relevance
relevance
world,
wounds.
yeah.
This requires a level of self-examination and
Mhm.
coming in touch with the feeling. It's not even intellectual examination. It's not
Mm,
talking to a psychiatrist. This is feeling it
mhm.
and being with it, and 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 being okay with it. Ultimately, it's like my baby's growing up here, and
Yeah.
right,
Yeah, I
and
refer
moving
to it
out,
like a
right.
kid going to school, right?
Yeah, it's going to school, right.
Yeah, but it's even worse than that, right? And I shared this on my social media just a little while ago. It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
you raise this kid and then he
right.
goes to college and there's some
Yeah,
disconnect there. It happens.
right.
But think of it like this. This is the emotional reaction or
Yes,
the emotional toll. Think about if that kid who you grew up, called you dad his whole life, blah, blah, all of a sudden starts calling someone else dad.
that's true.
Now that
Yeah.
is a
Yes.
extremely different wound
Yeah.
than just
Yeah.
letting, because if they're going to college and they go away, you
Yeah.
feel successful, right?
Right.
But
Yeah.
and this maybe not a great example. The best example I like to use is it's almost like, someone contracts a disease. Let's just say, I don't know, like cancer, right?
Right. Right.
So the person that has cancer has never been through it before, right?
Right.
They're experiencing something that they don't understand, they don't know how to deal with, right? And it's
Right.
difficult for them. Well, guess
Yes.
what? So is the spouse, right?
Yeah.
The spouse is
Yeah.
now dealing with something completely they don't
Yes.
understand.
That's
It's a
true.
different experience than what the other spouse is
Yeah.
going through, right?
Right.
So
Right.
they're both experiencing founder syndrome, right?
Yes.
And
So
this is
yeah.
where when I talk to founders, listen, your board,
Yeah.
your leaders, your employees, you're both going through it.
Yeah.
Now, the burden lies mostly on the founder because this is who has control over the reactions.
That's
And
true.
what you said, let me come back to what you said because I think that's important, right? You're right. We're big, strong, egotistical, macho men that don't like to
Yeah.
face our feelings. There's some
Yeah.
truth to that, no question.
Right.
But and I'm the same way. I'm a competitive guy. I don't like to
Yeah.
show my feelings that much, right?
Yeah.
I do learn more to be vulnerable. But
Right.
here's the thing. It's so much easier, right, to get past that. You
Yeah.
founders out there that are sitting there going, "Yeah, that's not me," but you know it's you in the back of
It
your mind,
is.
right? You can hear yourself talking back. Listen, there's a way to get past this, and this is why I coach on this. This is why
Yeah.
it's so important. People kill themselves because
Mm-hmm.
of this exact problem. So
Yeah.
listen up. This is important, right? When you identify what it is, and this moves to the next phase, the
Mm-hmm.
next stage, which is called naming the monster, right?
Right. Right.
When you identify it, think about it. When you're homesick, right, and
Right.
you've got ailments, right, runny
Yeah.
nose, cough, whatever, maybe something very serious, right,
Right.
and you have no idea what it is, right?
Yeah.
How do you feel when you go to the doctor and the doctor goes, heck, we don't know what it is.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
you go home, you're still worried, you're still you can't, it's hard to deal with it. You're frustrated, you're angry,
Yeah.
you're worried, what's going to happen, blah, blah, blah. Take that same scenario, you go to the doctor and the doctor goes, "Oh, you know what? You have XYZ." Right?
Right.
How relieving is that?
Yes.
Right?
Right
How
there.
when you come
Yes.
home, you're like, "Now I can face it. Now I know what to deal with." Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's called naming your monster. So when we're big macho guys, and we're telling ourselves, this was me, like, especially
Yeah.
my example I gave you, I'm sitting there going, "Gosh dang it, Luke, I'm just being arrogant. I'm being, egotistical.
Yeah.
This is not about me. I should stop thinking about this, blah, blah, blah." And the problem with these monsters, by the way, the monster that's in the back of your head talking, you know why we give them so much credit? Because the monster's us. It's our voice.
Yeah.
And when you hear
Yes.
yourself saying this stuff,
Yeah.
you legitimize it instantly
Yeah.
because it's you, right?
Right.
It's
Right.
you
Right.
talking to yourself. So it seems normal. It seems logical. When the fact
Yes.
of the matter is, it's just a monster that's mimicking you, if you will. So when you
Yes.
finally get the diagnosis, right? When you
Yeah.
finally realize, okay, I'm actually going through what's called founder syndrome.
Yeah.
I want to say it gives people, I hate to use the word excuse, but
Uh-huh.
it's more, it gives the founder justification of,
Yeah.
you're okay feeling that. It's okay.
Yeah.
And it's
Right.
understandable that you feel that way, right?
Yes. Yes.
So
Yes.
so now
Yeah.
you can turn around, you can look at this monster, you know what it is, you've
Yeah.
named it, now you
Yes.
can start shrinking it and get
Right.
control of it, right?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
sad reality, Bhavesh, is founder syndrome will never go away. I
Yeah.
guess unless your
Yeah.
company goes away, it will never go away. So we have to learn how to face and name our monsters.
Sure. Sure. And look, what is, someone who is, you've done coaching in this area. So there's a founder,
Mhm.
and he or she or they're saying, okay, it's like for a lot of us, it's a subconscious thing.
Right.
We can't really put a finger on it, and
Right.
we have never been taught in school. No one says, hey, let's sit here and do some self-examination. That's our self-examination period, or that's like
Yeah.
looking inward and reflective period. We don't have that,
Yeah.
right?
No.
So we have no training or skill in this area. So
Right.
we just kind of just go. We just
Yep.
barrel at whatever
Just
it is
deal.
that's thrown at us, right?
Yeah.
So it's a skill, yes. And what is a starting point to start developing a skill like this, where you begin to not only look at yourself, you feel what you feel, you
Mhm.
analyze what's going on, and you actually come up with a name. I think psychologists actually, this is one of the techniques in psychology where they say, as soon as you figure out what you're feeling, it's fear. Oh, this is
Mhm.
fear. As
Mhm.
soon as you name it,
Mhm.
it loses some of that power. You said
Yep.
shrink that
You
monster, right?
shrink it.
It
Yeah.
loses some of that the power because you
That's right.
named it and
That's
you
right.
figured out what it is. So you labeled it. And but is there some kind of practice that people can take on? And I know this is
Correct.
a difficult question, or some kind of I don't know, some kind of discipline they can follow to begin to kind of get more reflective
But yeah.
to start doing these kind of things.
So when you're setting me up here, Bhavesh, thank you. So you're right, when you name the monster, right?
Right,
You've gone through the relevance wounds. You're
right,
feeling these emotions that are very, very real. I mean,
yeah,
they're freaking real. I'd swear if we
yeah,
weren't on a podcast, that's how emotionally strong they are, right?
yeah, yeah,
The sad thing is only you feel it, and no
right,
one understands. It's like a cancer patient trying to tell their spouse what I'm feeling. They try
yes,
to understand, and
yeah,
and keep in mind, you're still trying to name it. Guess what?
right,
They're naming it too. And since they have no idea
yeah,
how it feels, they're of
yeah,
course going to misdiagnose, if you will, and
right,
call it, well, you're just being egotistical and you're being
yeah,
greedy and you're being all these
yeah,
things. When the fact of
yeah,
the matter is you don't even know what you're facing. You don't even know. You
right,
just know how it feels, right?
right,
I
right.
had a friend of mine tell me, actually in my organization, says, "Well, the organization isn't worried about your feelings, Luke."
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, you're exactly right.
Yeah, yeah,
What he doesn't realize is he's the spouse to the cancer patient. He's suffering
yeah,
from founder syndrome. Had he not if he would understand what founder syndrome is really about, then he would not only understand the reason why this founder might have a negative reaction or
Yeah.
understand what he's going through and help them, right?
Right.
Because
Right.
at the end of the day, right, a founder and an organization that can stay together in whatever role that founder ultimately ends up with will always be a stronger organization, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
why, if anybody really cares about the strength and the growth and the success of an
Yeah.
organization, you want these things to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
So both the founder, more the founder, but both the founder and the board, whoever
Yes.
needs to understand this. So
Yeah.
when you go through this relevant wound phase and you realize I've got a problem, and then you start getting some help or coaching that, hey, what you're going through is founder syndrome. Now you've got a diagnosis, right? So
Right.
your next question is, what do we do with that? That comes up to what I call the 5 disciplines of leadership evolution, right? So
Right.
the first one is,
So
so when
and,
you
and before we go into the so there's 5 disciplines, right?
correct.
I want to come here just one more thing. So as a leader, this is you have a special kind of leadership that we're defining here, right? Which
Mhm.
is different from just showing up and saying, "Where's my sales guy? What's my sales today?" And how much marketing did we do today, and how many leads do we have,
Sure.
and what's my bin counter telling me, and how are we doing financially, and what are my operations, all of those things, right? So
Right.
that's a CEO's job.
Right.
But we're adding a dimension to this leadership, right? Which is that, okay, self-examination and knowing who I am and where I am on my journey, right?
Right.
Do you think it's the leader's responsibility or founder's responsibility to not only do this with themselves, but also help others in the organization deal with it?
100%.
Is it? Yeah.
Absolutely, especially as it affects the founder and the
Yeah.
CEO, who
Right.
obviously is gonna affect the employees there. But
Yeah.
even understand it, I'll give you a great example.
Yeah.
Even within Sleeping Heavily Peace right now, we
Right.
have these chapter support lead, people that helped grow SHP to where it's at right now.
Right.
They have identity fusion that's happened, all this
Yeah.
stuff. Well, we've got to a point now where we don't really need a volunteer position there anymore, right? We actually need a
Yeah.
full-time staff person, and when you have a
Right.
full-time staff person, there's gonna be some things that they can take on, things that they
Sure.
don't need. I mean, there's just gonna be some leadership role changes, right?
Right. Right. Yeah.
Well, these CSLs struggle with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
feel they don't know it, but they
Yeah.
feel founder syndrome affecting them, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when the leader understands founder syndrome, understands what he's going through, and will help others recognize, listen, I get it. I get that
Yeah.
you're upset because we changed how you used to do things in your old position, because he understands that
Yeah.
this change, like, you changed
Yeah.
how I did this. Does
Right.
that mean I
Right.
did it wrong? Does that mean I screwed up? Does that mean no, no, it just means the success of what you did has now evolved to something else, right?
Yeah.
So they
Absolutely.
become a better coach to them. And I'm not saying you have to placate to all your employees' emotions. I'm not,
Yeah.
because they still have to make the choice to
Yes.
to what I call practice or use the disciplines of leadership evolution, because it's
Yeah.
still up to them, right?
Yes. That's true.
You hope
Yeah.
you hope that they take, or they have the training to be able to work through those and understand those feelings and recognize, yeah, they're feelings,
Yeah.
right? And they're deep and they're hurtful,
Right.
but they're not what they are.
Yeah.
They're not what they seem, right?
Right. Right.
And so leaders can help people that are going through that as they help themselves.
Yeah.
Again, the cancer patient can help describe to the spouse what they're dealing with.
Yeah.
And when the spouse knows it and understands it, it's kind of like, when the doctor says, by the way, Susie here is going to experience this, that, and the other. Well,
Right.
now Fred, the husband, can
Right.
understand better and deal with when she kind of goes off the hand or whatever happens, right?
Right.
You can
Right.
chalk that up to, yeah, this is one of the things that I was coached on that I
Yes.
need to be ready for. And then it diffuses the whole situation.
Right. Then you were talking about the 5, I believe you were saying the 5 dimensions of leadership or
I
5
call them the disciplines.
disciplines of
I used
leadership.
to call them
Okay.
practices, but
Okay.
And that, I mean, it's same words. I use the word discipline because it is, discipline seems to be more of a long-lasting thing, right?
Yes.
It's something that, you always practice. You practice something to get disciplined at it, I think.
Yes.
We wanna
Yes.
get to the discipline stage, right?
Yeah.
So
Sure.
and
Sure.
and we
Sure.
and we can,
Yeah.
so the first stage of this is it's like the obvious one, and I think it sets all of them in motion. You can't do the other ones until you do
Yeah.
the first one. And when you feel founder syndrome kick in, right? When
Yeah.
I hear someone say, "Oh, look, there's the new spokesperson for SHP," right?
Right.
Boom, founder syndrome kicks in, relevance wound strikes, I get cut. The first thing you need to do is just pause,
Right.
right?
Okay.
Pause before you protect.
Okay.
That's the biggest thing, right? So
Mm-hmm.
now instead of rearing up and getting
Yeah.
angry and even if it's internally, right?
Right.
And that's probably
Right.
the first thing it's gonna react is internally,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You just need to pause, right?
Okay.
And start remembering, okay, listen, is this founder syndrome? Is
Yeah.
this what I'm experiencing right now?
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, you're gonna be able to go, "Okay, yes, this is where I'm at, right? This is
Yes.
this is
Yeah.
what's going on," right?
Yeah.
Then that brings it to the next discipline, and that is and they're not necessarily related, but they do go along, and that's naming your season, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or
Mm-hmm.
naming where you're at, right? And
Right.
you need to name it out loud, right? So, for me, example, I'm the founder of Sleep at Emily Peace. Of course, yeah, great, right? Which I'm super proud of. I'm honored. Um, I'm not the builder
Mm-hmm.
anymore,
Yeah.
right? I'm not, and I'll tell you about the roles of leadership for a founder. I'm not the architect.
Yeah.
I'm not the anchor anymore. I'm
Right.
what I'm in the stage called the ambassador.
Okay.
Right? And
Yeah.
so I'm the spokesperson for the organization.
Right.
I'm a tool for the
Yeah.
organization, right? I don't make the decisions, And
Right.
some of the hardest things to do, and it's one of the disciplines is not jumping in to solve problems. That's what you
Right.
used to do, right?
Yeah.
You need a pause.
Right.
You need to reflect on what is my position now?
Right.
And I want everybody to know that. For
Yeah.
example, I had our CEO or executive director. I went to a build one time, and this is after now I'm just the founder.
Right.
Well, I did the build, I talked, shook hands, kissed babies, did all I was supposed to do, and then I left. Well,
Right.
I used to never do that, right? Because
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was a build, I'm supposed to be there all day, I'm supposed to help clean up, well,
Yeah.
I don't need to do that anymore,
Right.
right?
Right.
I
Right.
did it because I wanted to, it's my role and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Well, it's
Yeah.
not my role anymore, and so my CEO says, "Well, why did you leave early?" And I said, "Jordan, I'm an ambassador,
Yeah.
right? This is my role now. Did you
Mm-hmm.
really want me to stay and solve problems for everybody?" And he kinda
Yeah.
stepped back. I mean, I've known him for 40 years, he's my buddy. He kinda laughed,
Yeah.
he's like, "Okay, I got it."
Is there a phase after ambassador? So if you can just complete that stream of thoughts.
Yeah,
So you have three phases that you mentioned. You were at ambassador.
correct.
Is there a couple more after that?
Absolutely. So, and this is when you're dealing with it, one of the final stages, like I said, when you're naming your season,
Yeah.
the first season is a build. So
Right.
you can still be in a build phase and experience some of your founder syndrome. This
Right.
happens when, when you're bringing on leadership, right? Especially
Right.
maybe even a partner level leadership, right? When you're
Yeah.
bringing on leadership and there begins to have meetings you're not a part of and decisions that you weren't consulted on, you're still in the build phase of your organization.
Yeah.
Um, but that is a relevance wound,
Right.
right? That is a part of founder syndrome starting to,
Right.
itch at you or scratch at you, right?
Right. Right.
The next phase is the architect. And I really liked this
So
phase.
it's
Go ahead.
build and architect. So is it
The builder
build?
phase is the first one, right?
Right. So build
Much
architect,
Yep, build, architect, and then there's the anchor phase.
anchor phase,
Yep, and then there's the
then the
ambassador
ambassador,
phase. Yep, and
and
the
then
last one is the mentor.
okay, mentor. Okay,
Yeah,
perfect. Great.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
So and
so
then you were describing the five disciplines and
correct.
pause. What was after that?
Pause, yeah,
Yeah.
pause, gather yourself,
Yeah.
identify what's going on within
Right.
yourself before you react or protect, I
Before,
call. Pause before
yeah.
you protect.
Right.
The next phase is name your season. So
Name your
remember,
season.
where am I at? Am I a builder? Am I an architect? Am
In
I a
those five.
master?
Yeah.
Correct. Yep. Then you move on to understanding that separate. I want to make sure I get my words right.
Yeah.
Separate worth, or excuse me, separate your worth from what you think is need.
Okay. Yeah.
So what that means is a lot of times, and this is a hard one too. When
Yeah.
we're needed,
Yeah.
we feel valued, we feel worth, right?
Right. Right.
For a founder, when you're needed all the time, right?
Yeah.
You are
Yeah.
the man, right?
Yes.
You have you mark yourself up extremely valuable. There's a lot
Right.
of worth to me because of that. So
Yeah.
when your organization grows and you're no longer needed in certain roles, I
Right.
don't need to be the spokesperson right now
Yeah.
for Good Morning America. That's what my buddy does, right?
Right.
It's hard, and it's important to recognize because you're not needed doesn't mean that your value or your worth
Mm-hmm.
went down,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So understanding and dealing with and remembering that discipline
Yeah.
helps you not react the way
Right.
negatively, right?
Sure. Sure.
The next one is, and this is kind of obvious, that kinda goes with all of them. You just gotta do the inner work,
Sure.
right?
Sure. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's hard, and the inner work doesn't mean
Yeah.
you do it by yourself, right?
Yeah.
That's why I started this course. I want
Right.
people to know that you can work with it, and, therapy is great, right? I
Yeah.
tell you what,
Yeah.
I started taking anxiety medicine and
Mm-hmm.
depression medicine because I was going through founder syndrome. That's
Yeah.
how critical it was. I
Yes.
haven't touched the stuff now because I understand now. I'm more happy
Right.
with where I'm at right now than I've ever been, and I can appreciate my new role in Sleep
Right.
and Heavenly Peace instead of being so depressed and hurt and bitter and whatnot because I was going through this founder syndrome stage,
Sure.
right?
So that's number 4.
Yep. And then the last one is, remember, what you're choosing is
Mm-hmm.
legacy,
Ah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Legacy over proximity, right? So,
Yeah.
you know, am I important right now? And I need to be, and why aren't I this? And I need, that's legacy according to your proximity, or that's
Sure.
your desire
Sure.
according to where you're at right now. Really, you
Yeah.
need to be thinking legacy, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
here's the beauty of it. And all you founders, listen, your legacy is you, right? You
Mm-hmm.
created this. No one else can name that. No one else
Yeah.
can have that.
Right.
My one of the greatest moments of me dealing with my problems with the founder syndrome, and this is more geared towards nonprofits. My
Right.
buddy Jordan, he's been a very big confidant for me. I've
Yeah.
voiced all of this with him for many years. It's
Mm-hmm.
probably the reason why I'm still with SHP because he's been
Yeah.
such a good consultant and help, but just a good
Yeah.
friend.
Right.
And he said, Luke, you made one decision years ago with Sleep in Heavenly Peace that only you could make, and it only affected you. And no one will understand it but you. And that is you decided to make Sleep in Heavenly Peace a nonprofit rather than a for-profit. And
Right.
because you did that, we're able to help hundreds and hundreds of thousands of kids get beds rather than just maybe 1,000.
Yeah.
But what you gave up was control of your own company.
Yeah.
And
True.
so that is a great example of, even though I didn't know what I was doing it, but I
Mm-hmm.
understand it now.
Yeah.
I'm giving up proximity or
Yeah.
quote, quote, control
Yeah.
for what is called legacy.
Yes. Yes. And on that point, look, you are at number 4 of those 5 phases, right? And this from the ambassador. So what's the next one for you?
A mentor.
A mentor.
Yeah.
Are you looking to move to that phase eventually, or
Oh,
soon,
100%.
or
Yeah.
yeah, it,
When does it happen? I don't know. I
yeah,
really don't.
yeah,
I
yeah,
haven't hit that stage yet. I know generally the idea of what it's supposed to be, right?
yeah, yeah,
We
yeah,
want to mentor and move other people, younger people, through our organization. I did some board
yeah,
training just
yeah,
yesterday, and I talked to the executive director, who's the founder, and I said, "Listen,
yeah.
eventually, you and I are a footnote in this thing called our organization,
Yes,
right? Now
yeah,
we're a cool footnote. We're a big
yeah,
footnote. We're
yeah,
the founder, but
yeah.
ultimately, people aren't going to really care. I mean, can you tell me that the founder of I don't know, Habitat for Humanity?
No.
You know,
Hmm.
some people can. Most
Yeah.
people can't,
I
but they
can't.
know
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
organization, right? I couldn't even
Right.
tell you his name right now. I used to know it,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And that's the footnote I'm talking about.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that, eventually you become that. And so the organization's gonna grow and they
Yes.
need mentorship. They need, how
Yes.
did you get from point A to point B? How did you manage founder syndrome? How did you
Yeah.
deal with whatever it is in your organization, right?
Right. Right.
And so that mentor phase, I can't tell you when I'll be in it. I can't tell you
Yeah.
when someone else decides to be in it. I
Yes.
have a feeling that you and your organization will come to the same conclusion and say, "Okay, it's time that maybe you're not paid anymore, or maybe
Yeah.
you just move out of the limelight, the ambassador phase. You're no longer like speaking." I see
Yeah.
this more later in life,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
where
Yeah.
you get called in once in a while to maybe just pump the team up or what
Yeah.
have you. Yeah.
And I think you're kind of hitting on something that's so important. You can't rush it and you can't kind of drive it. It has to evolve. The
Right.
organization is evolving, you're evolving, and then the next stage the next step will become, clear
Correct. Yeah.
eventually, right?
It it'll it'll
Yeah,
show itself. Yeah.
it'll show itself. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And I think the hard thing too, sorry to cut you off, but I think the hard thing is, you know, I didn't know, and most founders don't know that, yeah, you need to prepare for these phases, right? You
Right.
don't I have an assessment that I have people that go through my course go through to
Yeah.
help them kind of identify maybe where they're at in
Right.
the 5 stages, right?
Right.
Because once they know, and then they
Yeah.
know what's coming next, right? Even the stage before, what they may have already went through, right?
Yeah.
They can
Yeah.
help s I don't wanna use the word stay in their lane,
Right.
but appreciate the lane that they're in, right?
Right.
And listen, here's the beauty of it. We're we're go-getters. We're
Yes.
founders.
Yeah.
We're builders. We're
Yeah.
growers. We
Right.
work late
Right.
hours. We're success,
Yeah.
right? Can you imagine how successful you'll be in your own organization once you realize what your lane is and everybody
Yeah.
knows it, and then you
Right.
can just focus in on that,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
absolutely. Just have a couple of questions. One is, and I think this is a very important one. Luke, sitting in his garage,
Mm,
putting together that first bed,
mhm,
and Luke today here having this conversation,
mm,
right? What's the difference between that Luke
mm,
and Luke today?
mm, mm. A huge difference.
Uh huh.
One has found a passion
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
what he feels is the purpose of his life,
Yes.
which has allowed him to build legacy. It's allowed him to build, something that I've always wanted, which is a footprint that
Yeah.
that that I'm leaving this life
Yeah.
maybe a little
Yeah.
bit better than when I first came in.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, I and I think this just happens in life, period.
Right.
But in my situation, I think I've been far more emotionally mature,
Hmm.
which I think brings happiness.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
tell people this is kind of off the well,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna say off topic, but the hardest thing in life,
Yeah.
which I think is one of the most important things to find happiness, Bhavesh, is learning to be honest with yourself.
Yes.
If you
100%.
if
Yeah.
you can be truly, truly honest with yourself, then you can learn to appreciate yourself. And when you do that, how can you get hurt? I mean,
Yes. That's true.
things can happen that
That's
get
true.
hurt, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
when you know yourself and you like yourself, and you're never gonna completely like yourself until you're honest with yourself. I mean, it kind
Right.
of goes back, you gotta face
Yeah.
the monster. You gotta name the
Yes.
monster and face it.
Yeah.
And I think for me I mean, I still got a long way to go, but I'm far, far farther down the road than I was when I started
Hmm.
the early piece.
Yeah. And on that point, Luke, what is it that you do, or metaphorically or literally, right? To kind of, there's so much change that, someone like you go through, right?
Right.
What do you do to root yourself and kind of ground yourself in the midst of all of this change?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a great question. I live by the montage
Hmm.
that we're just humans helping humans.
Yeah.
And I started that a long time ago. It had more of a religious connotation to me personally
Sure.
than I think what it has now. But because now, when it especially when you look at the world today and all the
Hmm.
conflict and the
Yeah.
disagreements and intolerance
Yeah.
and all that, there
Sure.
is one thing we all have in common. We're all just humans. you
Yeah,
know,
that's true.
and through the growth of life, the cycle of life from, the beginning to now, right? That's
Hmm.
the one common thing we have,
Yeah,
with each other is we're just humans, right? And the other
exactly.
common thing is we're going through this life together,
Yeah.
right? And so
Yes.
we get to choose how happy or unhappy we and others around us are going to be or can
Yeah.
be,
Yes.
and make a positive or a negative effect to that, right? And for me, it's just a little easier to think, being a human, I'm no
Yeah.
different. That's why I tell everyone, listen, I'm a farm kid from Idaho. I haven't
Yeah.
changed. I'm still a farm kid from Idaho, right?
That's true.
I've learned a
Yes.
lot, you
Yeah.
know, and if a farm kid from Idaho can start something and grow it to be the biggest of its kind in the world, anybody can,
Yeah. That's
you
true.
know.
So it's a great message.
Mm.
And who is the kind of person that you like to reach out today? I know that you are a busy guy and you do a
Mm.
lot of things, but
Uh-huh.
what's one or two categories of people that you would like them to reach out to you and connect with you? I know you're
Uh-huh.
working on a course, and
Mhm.
obviously you have Sleep in Heavenly Peace.
Right.
And so, what's at the top of your mind, and who are the kinds of people that you would like to connect with, and how do they get hold of you?
So, I mean, I live for service. It just
Yeah,
it
yeah,
charges my batteries, right? This is
sure,
one reason
sure.
why I'm so passionate about this kind of new little side project, if you will. I don't call it
Yeah,
a side project because I think it's so important, right?
yeah,
Um, because I went through it and I know how
yeah,
detrimental it is. And
yeah.
the sad thing is, the hard thing I'm facing, if I'm being completely honest, is,
Hmm.
do I charge for this course or not? Because I'm so passionate about it, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah, sure.
working for a nonprofit, you kinda have to
Yeah,
find
yeah.
other sources of
Mm.
income, but, you know, I just love helping people. I love the joy and maybe it's selfish, but I love the satisfaction, the joy that it brings me
Yeah,
when I help other people, when I can help change someone else's lives. Because what I find is, and I tell people, "Listen, you might not change the world,
yeah.
but you might change someone's world, and that someone might just be you, and
Right.
that's great. That's
Yeah.
movement, that's
Yes.
moving forward, that's
Exactly.
improving, and so,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. And we'll put the links to your website, and if you
Yes.
give us the link to the course where people can sign up and things like
Yeah.
that, we'll put that in our show notes so that
Yeah.
when we publish the episode, it'll be there at the
And I
at the
will say
bottom.
right now, it's a brand new course, right? I'm still
Yeah.
putting I call a little
Yeah.
lipstick on the pig, if you will.
Sure. Sure.
But if you wanna learn more about it, right,
Yeah.
you can go to my website. It's my
Yeah.
speaking website. It's just lukemickelson.com.
Okay. Perfect.
I've got a tab called Founder Syndrome, and I'm putting more content on there.
Yeah.
I'm actually putting together, what I call my group course.
Right.
I'm gonna offer it for free because
Yeah.
it's more, I'm gonna kick the tires here and work the
Yeah.
bugs out.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna find 10 founders that feel like they're going through this. I'm gonna
Sure.
walk them through. It's a 6-week course.
Okay.
And I meet with them once a week, but I'm so passionate about this. I really
Sure.
want I know it's valuable because I don't think it's talked about a lot,
Yeah.
if any.
Yes.
When I looked
Yes.
for founder syndrome, I found 2 or 3 books that I read. Most and all of them, they weren't from people that have went through it. They were just
Yeah.
people that studied it, right? And
Right.
so I think
Right.
there's some advantages of actually feeling those feelings and relating to people and understanding the hurt and how deep that is,
Yeah.
and how negative it can turn if we don't take care of it. So yeah,
Definitely.
lukemickelson.com,
Got
or
it.
if you wanna learn about SHP, it's shpbeds.org.
Okay.
You'll find me on all the social media fronts. Just type in Luke Mickelson or SHP Luke, you'll find me.
Yeah. All right. And we'll also put your LinkedIn profile in our show
Yes.
notes just so that
Awesome,
they can
thank you.
reach out and connect with you. So thank you so much, Luke. I think what you've done is just extraordinary. And
Wow.
you built an organization, you scaled it, and the important part of that is the fact that you are open and transparent, and you are kind of sharing yourself, your inner life and inner journey with the world. And I think this is extremely rare, extremely
Wow.
rare.
Wow,
And
thank you.
so appreciate you. Thank you so much for coming on the show and having this conversation, sharing your wisdom and your knowledge and your journey. And we'll continue the conversation offline, and maybe you can come back again in a year or two, and then we can continue the conversation here as well. So
Love to, love to. When I come out with my book, I'll come on and share
perfect.
it with you.
Yes. Yeah. Look forward to it. Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
sir.